But for the purpose of this workshop, I would ask that if you have a question, like I said, so the structure is going to be for the first couple minutes, or well, for the first portion of the workshop, I'm going to discuss some of these more common questions. And just this will offer the time for people to percolate and sort of decide what the question they think is most pertinent. But so I'm going to answer some of these questions I've pre-prepared, and then I'll open the floor to Q&A. And what I'd like, if you have a question, it's far easier for me to address these questions via the Q&A panel. So if you have a question, use the Q&A panel, and I'll do my best to get to them. And like I said earlier, if I can't answer a question, shoot me an email and I will find an answer for you. But yeah, it's 12:59. Let's get this started. Let's start talking about ACDSee. Okay, so so the first question, like I said, so these are just the whole purpose of this is common questions. What are most people asking about ACDSee that comes up really often? And I think I'm going to pose this first question, and it's a big one, and it's one that comes up very, very regularly for my that I answer via email and answer in workshops. And the question is, what is the difference between develop and edit mode? For those of you that are new to ACDSee, there's a lot of different modes within ACDSee, but the primary modes are, of course, manage mode, where you utilize the mode we're in right now, where you navigate to your files, you make metadata changes, you label, you categorize, that sort of thing. So it's basically a directory to find the certain locations on where you have your files. But then the secondary modes that are really of importance here are edit mode and develop mode. And there are pretty significant differences between the two, but you'll notice that, I just need to hide this here before I can go on. There we go. There we go. Okay. So the develop mode and edit mode are the two secondary modes in ACDSee, and they are very similar. So let's open up an image. For example, just go into this folder right here, and we'll open up just any random image and bring it into develop mode. And you'll notice as you go into develop mode or edit mode that there's going to be a lot of the same tools offered to you. So here we are. We have our nice photo. And, on the left-hand panel where we have, functionally all these different tools, right, you'll notice that a lot of these are represented also within edit mode. So we've got things like general exposure, highlights, contrast, saturation, white balance, light EQ, color EQ, all of these things that when we navigate to our edit mode menu, right, within edit mode, you're going to notice, hey, Adam, all of these things exist here as well: exposure levels, tone curves, light EQ, color balance, all of these things, right? So you're saying like, oh, okay, well, how do I choose a mode? Like, which mode is going to be more beneficial for me? The two main differences between develop mode and edit mode are as follows. Develop mode is intended to be used as a parametric, non-destructive raw editor. And you're like, what does that mean? So non-destructive in this case just means when you make changes to your image that you can restore your image to its original values. Nothing that you do to that image is going to functionally affect the original file that you have stored on your hard drive. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that all of the changes that you make within develop mode are made at the same time and applied that way, versus edit mode, which has a very different functionality, and not all changes within edit mode are non-destructive. Most can be, but not all can be. So what do I mean by this? So first and foremost, you have develop mode, which is used for developing raw images. So the images that you just take on your camera, you don't compress them as JPEGs, you're just saving them as the camera raw file. So when I go about making these changes, what happens to an image? So we'll talk about a little bit about that, and then we can discuss the edit mode changes themselves. When you develop an image, specifically with raw images, I make a bunch of changes to this image. I've just changed the contrast, and I've boosted the cyans and that sort of thing, and maybe the blues. So we have a functionally different image than the one we started out with. Now let's save those changes. Now, when I've made changes to this image, like I said earlier, it's non-destructive. It is a parametric edit. And we know this because the changes that we have been indicated with this little development icon that appears in the bottom left-hand corner when we go back to manage mode. So if I was to look up the location of this file on my hard drive, there would be a little file, sidecar file, that is placed in with that location, that image. What does that mean? Well, that sidecar file is the file itself that contains the information that we made, the changes that we made to this image. Remember what we changed the contrast. Remember that we changed the blues. That is where that information is stored. And that is very different than functionally making a hard change to that original raw file. So what that means is when we open up that raw file in ACDSee, like we just did, right? When we go to develop that image, what ACDSee is referencing, what it's asking for, is that XMP file, that sidecar file that's saved along with the original file. All this means is that original raw file is perfectly fine. It's exactly how it appears. It's just that when we open up this image, right, in develop mode, it's just saying like, hey, in order to present this image to you, the changed image, I'm just going to need to reference a file. And that file is that XMP file. So when we say develop mode is truly non-destructive, that means that all of these changes can be undone at any point in the future. So if I was in develop mode and I was looking at this file that I'd made these changes to, that this XMP file is referencing, well, I can always just reset it to default and undo it, and that way, it goes back to the original file. This can also be done within manage mode. Let's just crank the contrast again in some of these blues to illustrate this. But this can also be done within the within manage mode, just by always at any point right-clicking on your image and going to the process panel and then restoring to the original. So in this case, I guess what we're doing is whatever XMP profile that we had with those changes, we're just saying, oh no, now ignore those, let's just go back to the original image. So there's lots of things we can do within develop mode that look the same in edit mode. As we discussed, we can make like these color changes or contrast or add vignetting or all of these things, right? But the aspect of it that's so important is A, we're editing a raw file, B, we're editing it non-destructively. And although we can make those changes within edit mode, they're going to look very different because edit mode, specifically within ACDSee Photo Studio Ultimate, is a layered editor. So let's sort of switch this now to talking about edit mode and talking about layered editing. I'm just going to take a quick second after I open this up to just check our questions here. So in edit mode, okay, let's make the exact same changes. And I'm going to illustrate this in two different ways. Let's go in and make some contrast changes. So I don't know, let's go into levels, for example, and just crank these, reduce these, hit done. Let's maybe make some of those, color EQ changes. We'll, further saturate the blues. Okay, so we've functionally received, again, just very loose, but it's very similar, right? We're making the similar changes to this. Now, what we've done, though, is we've done this within the filter menu, which appears on the left here. Now, you might have moved it. There's lots of different ways you can sort of place these things. But the filter menu is destructive. So when you're editing within edit mode, right, and say you're working on a raw file, well, what it's going to do is it's going to, it has to compress that file. Obviously, ACDSee and any editor, for that matter, cannot save over a raw file. It's not possible to do. What is possible to do is take a raw file and say, okay, we're going to make some changes to this. I'm going to convert this to a JPEG or a TIFF or a PNG or some sort of lossy file type. Okay. And then when I go to make my changes and save it down, it will be that file type. So in this case, using the filter menu, I've made all these changes, but it's important to note that these changes are destructive in this case. You looking over at our layer here, like I said, ACDSee Photo Studio Ultimate is a layered editor, right? Our layer 1, if we're going to go save this image, it's going to ask us to save this image as something else. Like I said, a JPEG, a PNG, a TIFF that's mentioned earlier. But it will flatten the file. These, the XMP profile I was mentioning earlier that is sort of proprietary to develop mode, that sidecar file. None of those changes will be referenced. However, there are ways of, and there's significant ways of acting non-destructively within edit mode. It's just not done within this filter menu that appears here. So there is, I guess, the first sort of note that we have about edit mode being a different functional mode is that, okay, there's some destructive changes that we can make, right? But one of the major aspects about edit mode is that it is sort of akin to Adobe Photoshop versus it being something like Lightroom, right? In that ACDSee's edit mode is a layered editor. And with layered editors allow you to make some pretty complicated compositional changes to your image. And let's discuss what those are so you can get a feel for it. And I'm just going to make really simple basic changes. We're not going to, we're not going to create art here. I'm not going to be creating art today. I'm just going to be illustrating what I mean. And if you want to see created art, I would reference to check out some of our past workshops. But I'm not going to save this image. I'm just going to discard it, along with the whatever changes we made. Let's open up a different file. In fact, let's just take, let's just take this image right here, I think. This will be fine. Yeah, that'll be fine. Okay, so I'm going to take this, I'm going to edit this image and bring it into edit mode. So we have our image here. And let's sort of move away from the filter menu that appears on the left here, begin the conversation about layered changes. There's a lot of things to do with layered editing. Masking is a huge component, like creating multiple layers, adding different image files onto our layer here, which we're going to do here to illustrate that. But so let's just take this image, our layer 1 here. So most of our editing, right, when it comes to photography editing, it's just done with one image, right? Layered editing is a little bit different in that we can still get that contrast change. Remember earlier when we adjusted the levels in this to sort of replicate a contrast change? Well, I can do that within a layered editor. I'll just go down to my adjustment layers here and I'll find levels. And this is very different than doing this in the filter menu, which is, it's a hard change. Once it's done, it's done. And every subsequent filter menu change, it applies onto the one you just made. Well, this one, we're looking at it right here. Well, there's the levels, and you notice that there's a tool down here that indicates that, oh, well, we can make, contrast changes to this image however we like. Well, this change is non-destructive. And there's two ways it's non-destructive in that, first of all, during the editing process, well, I can easily just turn this off, or I can move this, or I can delete this. I can do many things with this. But the secondary component, which is really important, is I can save this this change, right? This layer 1 with the levels over top of it. I can save this as an ACDSee file. And an ACDSee file is similar to other sort of creative design files in that we can open it up at a later time, right? And then see that these levels changes that exist within that file. So I'm just going to do that. Let's just save this, levels change to our layer 1 here. I'm just going to go down to save as, and I'm just going to save this. Let's save it within that same folder that we had, right? So yeah, it was within the workshop of today, and then perfect. Let's just save it in the above folder, and I'm just going to call this change. And when I save it, I'm going to save it as an ACDSee file format. And the reason why is because I want our changes to be non-destructive. Save this. Great. It's going to run through that. And I know that when I open up this file in the future, right? So let's go back to manage mode and find a different file. Say back in the folder menu, let's go into our coastline image here. In edit mode, not view mode. And then if I was to say, well, maybe I wanted to go back to that other file in the future, maybe 2 weeks later, maybe 3 weeks later or whatever, and then open it up. I know that those same changes that I made earlier, these levels changes, are maintained, and they're at the exact same levels I left them at. And so this is non-destructibility, right? Like what I've just done there is non-destructive. And I know that if I make those saturation changes that I made in the previous image where I, up the saturation here, or I, adjust the color EQ, maybe I want to increase the cyans and the blues or however, I know that these changes that I can save non-destructively and I can open them up. But this is only one aspect, right, of layered editing, in that I'm adding these filter changes, these vibrancy, these levels adjustments. Well, and the question I posed at the very beginning, this sort of big question is, well, okay, but how is that any different than develop mode? In develop mode, Adam, you made these changes non-destructively. You were working with a raw file, yes, which is different, but you made these same changes. Well, the aspect of this that we need to add to this is that, like I said earlier, this is a creative tool. It's a design tool. I can go in, I could find another image file, say this balloon image here or whatnot. I can place this image within our file however I want. I can go about masking this image so I can create a combination of images, which I'll do in a sec here. I'm just going to finish sizing this. So, if I had placed this image and I want to mask so that maybe I only see the sky in one image, so I can go about sort of combining multiple images. And much like the adjustment layers we were discussing earlier, again, this ACDSee file remembers these changes. So when I bring it open the next time, 2 weeks later, when I want to work on this crazy, compositional project, it's going to remember my layer 1. It's going to remember my vibrance changes. It's going to remember my color EQ changes. It's going to remember that I placed this wacky balloon image over top of it and that I've masked a portion of the image. These are all things that it's going to remember. This you cannot do in develop mode. So I've made all these layered changes. That is unique to edit mode. I've made these vibrancy adjustment layers that are unique to edit mode in that I can create a composition, which is different from develop mode, where I'm working, for the most part, exclusively with raw images, and I'm working non-destructively within that space. So I'm going to just take a little second here because this was a sort of a longer tangent to talk about non-destructibility and to talk about the difference between develop and edit mode. And I'm just going to take a look to see if I've missed any massive questions in regards to this. No. Yeah, so a Kath had asked, so raw file changes in develop mode instead of edit mode doesn't wreck original. So yeah, so I think I answered that over the course of that, but exactly. So yeah, I mean, I can non-destructively edit a raw file in develop mode, and I can't do that within edit mode, because when I go open up that raw file, I'm not creating a sidecar file. I'm just like strictly will be saving at some point, you know, a JPEG or some form of compressed file. So those two things are very different. So let's take a look. Let's answer some quick questions within the Q&A panel before I go to my next sort of major segment. Wilbert asked, is ACD planning on adding stitching to a future for panorama pictures? This has been addressed multiple times. I've sent, so we've had a bunch of people suggest this and ask this. Like, are you going to be doing panorama stitching in a future edition? And while I don't know necessarily the status of that within a future release, I do know that I have personally sent 6 or 7 emails with that suggestion to our development team. So it is definitely something that has been heavily considered. So that's as much as I know. But if you're really excited about the aspect of panorama stitching and you really want that feature, I would just say shoot me an email and I'll shoot it once again off to our development team to show them that that is something that is really, really wanted in the new release. See if I can answer any other more quick questions before I go to my next one. Okay, so here's a quick question in regards to selections, which was probably another big one that we'll talk about. But the question is a question that Shari has asked here. And they ask, I would like to know how to outline and move an outline from one photo to another. That is a great question. Okay. Now, I believe that if you make a selection within one file, I'm just trying to think about whether or not that selection is transferable to another image. So if we're going to make a selection, say the selection is, let's go, I don't know, let's just make a selection with the square tool here. So like a selection like this, I'm going to move it, that's my selection, this little pink area right here. I can save the selection, which we know. We can save the selection using the select toolbar, and then the drop down here, it says save selection. I'll just enter it as 1. But I do believe that this selection might be, in this case, proprietary to just this image here. So if we go into another image and try to load that selection, I don't think it'll represent the same select. Yeah, so it's not remembering in this case the same selection. So is there a way to get around this? Functionally, saving selections. The reason why this is not the case through the select drop-down bar here is sort of like, unlike other editors, making a selection is like every image is a different size, right? So like if you take this image, it's like 3,000 pixels by 4,800 pixels or something like that, versus your other image. Those images are different sizes. So it would have to find a way to synthesize those two selections and even know that those two images might be very different proportionally, like they might be completely different in terms of their ratios. So I think this functionality, the saving selections and making across different images, is something that is like understood and is going to be addressed in further editions of ACDSee. I would say there's no simple way to use the load selection for other images, but I will have to double check on that because that is something that I personally am unfamiliar with. So I would ask, I would send this question to my email, and I will be able to double check with our development team and ask whether or not there's a transferable method to sort of take selection from image to image. But I think currently as it stands, you can save a variety of different selections and you can load a variety of selections, but it's based on a singular image, or the one image, and it isn't transferable to another image because it wouldn't be able to replicate the size of that based on the size of your original image. So hopefully that answers your question. Let's take a look here. Here's a simple question. Seema has asked, why does it take so long to adopt camera lenses and bodies that have been out for 2 years? Okay, because Sony doesn't give that information freely. So that information, just like Canon and Pentax and all these different camera companies, they're not going to be providing any of these companies, like even big companies like Adobe or ourselves or Camera One, any of these, they're not going to be giving those companies proprietary information about their proprietary cameras. Like, they're not going to be providing those qualities. So what development teams need to do is they basically need to utilize trial and error to create profiles for those cameras. Some of those things are created on a community basis, but a lot of companies that are creating products similar to our own will have to create a whole development cycle in order to interpret these camera models. Some are faster to adopt. Honestly, the bigger the company is that's creating a camera model, the easier it is to adopt those camera profiles. So in that there's going to be more people using that camera, there's going to be more demand for that camera model, and that's why it takes longer to create those camera profiles. Scott asked, I'm confused why it wouldn't be beneficial to use a JPEG in develop mode. Doesn't it still have the same non-destructive benefits? Yeah, Scott, so it does. And everything that I was talking about earlier is super, it's exactly it functionally works identically with a JPEG. The difference between a JPEG and a RAW file, though, is a JPEG can store that XMP information within the file itself, and therefore no sidecar file is created when you edit a JPEG. But for the purpose of your question, they're totally the same. The difference is that obviously, like I said, with develop mode, it is functionally designed to develop raw images. It also can develop, lossy file types like JPEGs and PNGs and all these TIFFs, etc. But it just, like I said, with things like JPEGs, the actual profile changes are held within the file and not within a sidecar file. Okay, so before I sort of go on and answer more of these sort of custom questions, I'd like to talk about, I guess my next big thing will be databasing. And this is something we've already talked a little bit about in previous sessions. So I'm going to go back into manage mode. This is sort of the next biggest question that I have asked. It is a big one. And that question is, so I had actually someone ask me earlier today, what was it? I think it was via YouTube. And that the question was, hey, Adam, what's like, I'm worried that when I moved to ACDSee 2019 from ACDSee, I think the customer was using ACDSee 15. So like a really old, like, a really older version of ACDSee. Well, the question is, well, like, how, if I install the new ACDSee Photo Studio Standard or, Ultimate or something like that on my computer, like what will occur with my previous files? So all my images and that sort of thing. And I think the way that I answered this question is it's twofold, because they're asking two different things, I think. The first thing is very simple to answer. It coincides sort of with how ACDSee has been designed all this time. And that is ACDSee doesn't ask you to import any files ever. There are functional ways that you can import in ACDSee, but these are but this is more for just moving files around to different hard drives. It's less about sort of importing a body of work, onto ACDSee to be able to cultivate these changes. So it works very, very differently to something like that of Lightroom, right? So ACDSee, okay, works directly off of your hard drive. So when you edit a file, remember what I said earlier about editing these XMP, editing raw files. Well, those XMP profiles are not, they're placed in the same location of your file. So we're, like I said, we're working right off of a directory here, and you can see that directory within ACDSee. It's just on the left-hand side here. Here's this menu. Here are these, all of our folders, etc. This is exactly representational of my my hard drive. So I'll just open up a file explorer here and show the same on our screen here. But so we were looking within our pictures folder, we were looking within a specific workshops folder, we were looking at this current date, so the June 19th. So when we edit our images, we're either overwriting or we're saving a new file in these locations, or like we've talked about earlier with develop mode, we're non-destructively editing these files. We're adding XMP profiles into these locations. It's really important to sort of understand that ACDSee is always working off of whatever hard drive setup you have. It's not asking you to do any importing. It's not asking you, you're not bringing these files into ACDSee. ACDSee is working off of the files on your hard drive. So when the person asks this question, I think really what the question is more about databasing than it is about the software overall. Because if you were to just install ACDSee Ultimate 2019 after using ACDSee 15 or whatever for years and years and years, there's no functional change, because as long as you're using the same computer and you have the same hard drive and everything, then there's no issue. There's no issue there at all. That's the huge selling point to ACDSee. But I think the question is largely more about cataloging, and there's more about sort of creating a database. Regardless of whether or not you wanted one, ACDSee has a database for you. So, and what a database is it's a very simple thing. It stores information about the files. Most of what it stores is metadata. But so when you go to start your ACDSee, for the very first time, you just bought ACDSee FOSTU Ultimate 2019, it's going to create a database for you. And you can see that database to going File, Database, and you can open a new database. You can you can open a pre-existing database, or you can add a new database, or you can even view the most recent database that you have. So, but like I said, at the very beginning of using ACDSee, there's already a database for you. It's called like default database or something. So what does a database house? Well, it houses a bit of information. The first of which is labels and ratings. So when you go in manage mode and you click on the little square up here and you label your image blue for whatever reason, or you rate your image a 4 out of 5 stars, whenever you do that, you're adding database information. You're also adding database information whenever you add, keywords or categories to your image. And this goes, and again, these are things that, over the course of time, your database is checking these things and saving them. It's a good idea to update your databases, right? But so if you say, if you've been doing this for years, you've, hundreds of rated and cataloged and labeled files, and files you've added particular keywords and things like that, these are the things you don't necessarily want to lose. Obviously, the locations of your images. They're on your hard drives, or they're on your, physical computer hard drive itself. But you have all this sort of keyword and labeled and rating information that actually is sort of sensitive. So when you install the new version of ACDSee to your, after using 15 for many years or however, if you were to just install the new version of ACDSee Ultimate 2019, that version will not be able to access the old database. You can't just open up the database and expect everything to be tickety-boo. It doesn't work like that. So, but there is a process for operating as such. So I guess the two things you functionally need to know is, like I said, regardless of whether or not you wanted one, there's a database for you. So let's find out where that database is. If I go to Tools and I go to Options, there's some information under the Database panel about databases. First and foremost, it shows you where the file is. So there's a little list here. So it's under Users, it's under aprice, it's under my app data, etc. And then eventually it's just going to be called, as I imagined it would be, default.bin. This is my database file. This is the file that contains, like I said, these ratings, these labels, these keywords, this important information that I've created that has to do with my files. But if I just installed the new version of ACDSee on my computer, well, I'm not going to be able to use that database, not unless I do something really important. And that is, I would go to my database panel within the new product, and I would convert my old database. So it brings up this little conversion wizard, and it's a very simple process. The process is that you select the previous version, and like I said, oh, it looks like ACDSee 15 is listed, and there's a ton of versions listed because this is a 15-year-old product, or sorry, a 25-year-old product. But ACDSee 15 is there. And then I would simply navigate to that location of my database, right, that I had saved previously. And then I would go through the process of converting it so that all of the images that are on my computer that should functionally be in the exact same locations because ACDSee uses the hard drive, right? Well, then all I would do is I'd make sure that I could find my old database so I could update it, I can convert it to the most recent version, and then I work with that database. This is how I maintain, 15 years worth of keywords and labels and ratings and all of these things and move forward with it. This is really important. That's, of course, saying it's really important if you care about ratings, labels, keywords, etc. If you don't, then whatever. It's not important. You don't need to worry about it. But I was going to say something important about this, and I was going to say, and another thing, you might be in a position where you're like, hey, Adam, okay, convert database, great, okay. I know that it was, version 15, but I, for the life of me, can't remember where I put that thing. There is a default pathing, but whatever, if you can't find it, well, then the very simple thing to do is before you, just make sure that you save your database, you boot up your database and you save your new database to the location of your choice. Say, put it on your desktop or in a folder that you're gonna, you have easy access to, and that's where you're gonna grab your database to convert to for the new version. So when someone asks me a really simple question like that, like, hey, am I gonna lose all these files when I move to ACDSee Ultimate 2019? Firstly and foremostly, absolutely not. ACDSee has nothing to do with holding and storing your files. It is just a management tool for that files. It sees your files, right? But what you may lose is any work that you've done within ACDSee itself, right? So if you have these keywords, these labels, these ratings, these things that would qualify under things that are elements of our database, those are the elements that you need to upkeep, not the location of your files. Okay, so that was sort of big question number 2. Let's get back to some of your questions. Okay, Q&A panel. Okay. Oh, yes. Now we can answer Alexi's question because we're talking about metadata. Let's see. I'm going to go back to my default workspace. That's right. Okay. So Alexi's question is, not sure if we'll cover it, but just as a question, is there a way to generate metadata from a file name? I.e. pics imported from mobile phones contain date and time in the file name, but metadata is empty. It's important to organize pics date and original time. Okay, so I'll answer this the best way I can. So we have our image here, right in our manage mode, and we have a bunch of different metadata panel information. If you don't have access to the properties panel, you can get it from the panes up at the top here. For some reason, you've closed properties. Well, it's right there underneath panes properties. And boom, underneath properties, I have metadata, organize, and file. And we have a bunch of information we can add here. So I believe under EXIF, so you can add any of these things, right? You can just go ahead and add as much of these values as you want. So you can assign your date and time, you can assign your date, time digitized, all of these things. You can add sort of custom ACDSee metadata, so when you've databased it, author, notes. What did you ask specifically? You asked about date and time and in the file name. Well, the file name is located right there, but you can edit that. You can edit the title. So all of this information is here within the properties panel. This is where you control your metadata. So let's see. So let's just entertain this. Let's add a date. Let's add today's date, which I think is 2019. Oh yeah, there it is. Perfect. Okay. So today's date. And let's add an ISO of, I don't know, 100, or rather, actually, let's add add some information here. Let's go author Adam. Remember, I think if the field is grayed out, it will not allow you to add it, and if the field is like a light gray, it can allow you to change it. So keywords, yeah, that's right. So title, beautiful coast. Okay, so I've added some metadata. It's just a couple different elements. So when you've added metadata to a file, there's going to be this little bin that pops up on the bottom left-hand corner. This is important. This is a pending metadata bin. So metadata is not useful to anyone else unless you've embedded it. In that if you were to pass this file onto a friend, ship it to a friend or something like that, well, they're not going to be able to view the metadata if it's pending. And the reason why is because it has not yet been written to the file. So we need to write that metadata. And I believe if we click, oh, it might be just right here. Right-click on the image and go to embed ACDSee metadata. That will functionally allow us to write that information. And it says that it has succeeded and we're done. So that information is now saved to the file and it exists. Well, there's the time and date. There's my author name and the IPTC says the title is Beautiful Coast. So it will remember these things. So Alexi, I'm not sure if that answered your question, but you absolutely can control all of these metadatas within ACDSee by utilizing the properties panel. Okay. Let's see another question here. Thomas asked, used it for a long time, but I only download pictures of teeth and patients for the most part. I did take the pictures in Africa, but I did not doctor them. Too lazy. Just looking for some tips of the process. Doctoring teeth. That is a really specific and interesting question. Well, the first thing that would come to mind is if you're working with teeth, which I don't have any photos of teeth, but what I might have some photos of is high contrast, which I think is what you're referring to. Because teeth are bright white, and you might see. Okay, here's some teeth. I don't know what the case is. I'm assuming these are face photos, or maybe you're a dentist or something like that, and you're utilizing it to maintain, like, you're using it as to keep track of your clients and that sort of thing. But if you're looking to specifically target certain things, I might suggest, if you're looking to like whiten or select certain aspects of your images, what I would suggest maybe is to hone in on the specific element of your image. In this case, we've selected our teeth here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use a brush selection tool to select only the teeth. So I'm going to select the brush selection tool. It's at the top left here. And I'm just going to reduce the size of that brush. And I'm going to make sure that smart brushing is selected to, or is rather set to magic. And then when I go through and I make my selections here, it's going to be pretty good about remembering what aspects of the photos are the teeth here versus the gums and the black space that's in between here. So I can go through and I can just make, again, my tolerance is really cranked, so it's being a little less selective than it needs to be. I can reduce that. But you can select these sort of teeth, and depending on what you're trying to do, maybe you want to just select these things or save these things, or you can create some form of, in this case, we've sort of just made a mask of just the teeth. So from there we can edit. So if we wanted to, okay, well, I want to actually sharpen these teeth, I can go about sharpening just that element. And so now I can see the detail and a little bit more. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, whether or not if you're trying to like whiten these teeth, once you have a selection of them, you can obviously, add white balance or, more vibrance, or reduce the vibrance and increase the saturation and all these things. You could increase the lightness. So you can sort of whiten teeth that way once you have an actual selection of them. Yeah, the other thing too is like a lot of times what I do with, like, say if I'm just lightening eyes, for example. So let's, this is kind of creepy, my little teeth selection here. Probably something that people are, see every day. But if I just want to lighten a specific element of my subject, right? In this case, if I was just lightening the eyes, oftentimes what you can just do is make a vibrance change. So if I want to make these eyes, they look inherently blue, but if I wanted to increase the vibrance and saturation of just the eyes, I would add this vibrance change. But this is being currently applied to my whole image. So I'm going to set this to black, and that mask right there to black. And then I'm just going to apply this vibrance change to just the eyes by painting that on with the mask tool. So I can sort of select these elements and then change the hue or whatever, and I can sort of adjust that from within this. Maybe saturation increase. So if you're trying to make them whiter, you can utilize this just by selecting the individual component like that with the masking tool. Hopefully that answers your question a bit more specific, but okay, so Jerry's asked, Adam, could you please briefly review the usage of face recognition on the program? Thank you for asking me, because that is actually a part of my third sort of one that I'd like to talk about, and that is face detection overall and optimizing it a little bit better. So I'm just going to go into my face detection portfolio, which is right here. And I made some images specifically for this. So face detection was introduced in the 2019 software. And face detection, what it does is it allows you to control there. Okay. It allows you to make suggestions of people's names. And so it'll remember this when it checks the rest of your sort of collection for these people of this name. So in this case, I have my photo of Aaron here. I've gone ahead and I've already named this person. So if I go through and I look at subsequent images, provided they're roughly within the shape of Aaron and they know what Aaron looks like, it'll be able to categorize them. And this is still very new, so there's lots of instances too where if you have a child that's growing up, you might have some changes, you might have some difficulty reading how the face changes over time. But so I want to go to a new image. I'm going to go to this image. Let's just sort of discuss this from the ground up. So we have our image here. Face detection has done a pretty good job of detecting two faces. However, there's actually two more in this image, but one is relevant. So face detection is something you can get by bringing your images into view mode. I'm into view mode right now. And there's a couple things. So to turn face tool on, that's this button right here, if it is for some reason turned off. And then the second thing is to show, or sorry, rather it's the other way around, to show face outlines. So if you don't want to see the outlines within view mode, you can turn it on with this button right here. And then the ability to add outlines and names is this button right here. So basically I've turned the tool on, and now I want the ability to edit names. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to add a person here. And this one's kind of interesting. So face tool, like I said, is pretty darn good when you have someone's, it's in the forefront, you know, it's not a profile, it's looking right at you, or looking sort of within that general spectrum. That's when it really shines. So this person is obviously seen. This profile is not bad. This one's a bit more obscured. So I want to actually add a face in here. And how I would do that is I would simply draw it on. So I'm going to add her here, and we're going to name her Brooke. So there's Brooke. And so like what we're going to be talking about is sort of just how to optimize and utilize face detection. And let's just call her Sarah, and let's call him Mike. So I've added 3 people, and this has been added to my directory of people. So if I see someone who looks like Sarah in my directory, it's going to suggest that that person's name is Sarah. If I see someone who looks like Mike, it's going to do the best to do that as well. So as I go through, I'm going to see how well this recognized Brooke, because Brooke is sort of the subject that I'd like to focus on here. So Brooke here is a profile versus Brooke here who's straight on. So I'm gonna suggest that this is Brooke. Oh, it's gonna suggest to me, it knows that this is that person exists within my directory, and now it's gonna name it. And then let's go to maybe my third image and see if it recognizes Brooke here. Scanning, and it knows that it's Brooke. So again, this tool is better optimized when you have more face than less face, which sounds like a silly suggestion, but it's true. The more you have of someone looking straight on or near-ish straight to the camera, the better it's going to be at recognizing that it is in fact their face. Let's see if there's a third. I don't know if it's going to notice Mike here. Maybe it will. Not quite. So again, this comes down to that sort of side profile thing. Let's sort of look at some different photos here. Let's scan the face here. It'll see that, oh, this is in fact Carol. Cool. Let's go to a different photo of Carol and see if it recognizes it as well. Scanning the image, looking through, it recognizes that it's Carol. So what happens if I say, like, go back into a previous image here? What happens if what happens if this image isn't actually Brooke? Like, it's someone who looks like Brooke, it's mislabeled them or something like that. Well, what we can do is we can operate within the individual photo itself, and we can reference this by just deleting the field in this case. So this was Brooke. Well, actually, this isn't Brooke. This is Tina. So I just delete that box, and then I'd add this in. And in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and rename that. One interesting thing is I want to maybe manage my my people overall. So I have all these people that I'm, now if I was to look through my, my selection of faces, it's going to remember a bunch of people. Here's Dale. I've got a bunch of named people now in my selection. These are people that I've sort of named previously. But I want to know, well, how many people do I have? So if I go within tools and manage people, I'll see my directory of all these people that I've sort of gone through the process of naming. So I have Aaron, Ashley, Brooke, Carol, Dale, Haley, Mike, Sarah, and Tina here. You'll notice that my image of Brooke and my image of Tina is the same, as I sort of renamed these people midway. It's within People Manager that I can sort of operationally delete an entire category of someone. So if I didn't want Haley in my images, or I wanted to sort of remove her face designation from my images, then I would go through the process of just removing the selected person. So, so this is how I would sort of further manage, you know, these faces and names within ACDSee. It's a really simple process in that you just add a name. It's going to do its best to search for these people. Obviously, the more photos that you have of someone in varying profiles will help search for them additionally later. So if you had more photos, the more ones that it struggles to name, but you can help it name, then the better it's going to be at tracking them overall. Just another quick addition to this too, just because you can search for people via their name. If I go to the catalog function and I go to the people function within manage mode, let's see here. Oh no, that's the wrong one. Sorry, I meant this one here. There we are, people. If I was to look at the people section, it will show me every photo of the person that I've gone about named. And here's our first couple images of Brooke. It should be, yeah, our one image of Tina, that sort of thing. If I was to also look up someone, in this case, I wanted to look up Dale using the quick search function just underneath the sort of main toolbar there. It will also bring up all these images of our person. So it does sort of functionally interact a little bit like metadata does in that we're sort of adding this information. But one important aspect about face detection is this information is added to the database. It's not actually added to the file itself. So if I was to provide this image of my friend Dale to my friend Dale, it won't, like the image itself won't contain that metadata, similar to how we discussed the embedding of metadata earlier. This information is treated within the database. This information is something that we save when we go about saving database information. So that's sort of like a top-down discussion about face detection and sort of how it works. Let's see here. There are so many questions. You guys are amazing. This is incredible. I wish I could get to all these. Okay. Okay, let's see if I can answer a couple more here. So we covered, so far we've covered databasing, we've covered facial recognition, we've covered difference between develop and edit mode. Oh, there's another big one I want to talk about, and that's the difference between skin tuning and skin correction, but I think I want to answer some of your guys' questions before we get to that. Okay, so Jeff's question, can you modify the develop mode toolbar, e.g. add the crop tool to the develop mode bar? Well, develop has the crop tool. So hopefully this answers your question. You don't need to leave or go into other modes for cropping. Cropping is within the geometry tab, which is the third tab, and you can crop within this function right here. So if I want to crop this portion of my image, boom, it's cropped within develop mode. So I guess this is just an introduction of what does development look like. Well, development has these 4 tabs. Tune sort of functionally is all these sort of light related adjustments. Detail is sort of particulate and luminance adjustments. Geometry is shape adjustments. And repair is the ability to clone images. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so Seema asks, there are luminosity masking apps made by third parties. Are we ever going to be able to use them? They are optimized for whatever process Adobe uses to launch them. So I hope this answers your question, but so ACDSee has, I'm just going to go back to that one folder here. ACDSee has the ability to add editors. So if you have this, like if you have a luminosity editor you love, you're just stoked on, that isn't like a LUT or something like that you can otherwise use in the program in a different way, but you really like this one luminosity app, let's just call it Lumo 2000 or something like that. Well, you can go about adding that editor by configuring editors within the top of manage mode. So what you do is you would add the program, you would direct to whatever program you want to use, and then you add it within that function. And then when you go to, say, click on an image and you're like, hey, I'm managing my image in ACDSee because it's a manager and I'm going to edit this image later. But before I edit it, I really want to make a luminosity adjustment within Lumo 2000. Well, I would right click on the image and I would go to external editors and open it within that editor. So ACDSee is compatible with other sort of editors. And I guess in this case, really, the purpose of it is there might be a tool that's better at, certain aspects of, like maybe there's a really awesome like editing tool that you want to use for X value. Well, you can manage your photos within ACDSee. You can run those programs. You can save that file all within the same location and then just go right back to using ACDSee for that purpose. So I mean, obviously we're not going to like run the app within the application, but we can take you through the directory process of here's my image, here's where it's located. Okay, well, I want to make this one quick adjustment and then back, boom, into ACDSee and then back to editing or managing however I like. So hopefully that answers your question, Seema. Thank you. Is there a way to export my panels and window view to set up another installation in an identical way? Oh, interesting question as well. Workspaces are a part of the, yeah, workspaces are another part of the database. So workspaces are up in the top here. You can set up a workspace however you like. So actually that's interesting because earlier I had my properties panel, this guy right here, from edit mode, or so rather from manage mode. I like my properties panel right up here. And I actually don't use preview or C drive at all, so I normally X this off. And then I just have my properties panel, which appears right here. So when I'm working with an image, I can be editing the metadata just on the left-hand panel. Well, when I save this information, right, if I'm like, oh, I really like the way that my workspace looks right now. Maybe this is the way that it's set up. This is the perfect way to set up my graphic user interface. Well, then I would simply go about just saving a workspace. So I go to manage workspaces and I would save this workspace that I'm using right now and I call it, I don't know, my best workspace. Well, when you go to install ACDSee Photo Studio Ultimate 2020 or whatever, workspaces are another thing that is remembered within the databasing function. So yeah, so simply create a database and then reference that database. And go through that databasing process of configuring or converting 2019 to 2020. And you're good. Great question. Really good question. What's the difference between done and save in develop mode? Great question. And I'm not even sure if I know the answer. Let's take a look. Develop and save. So I've opened up an image. I'm in develop mode. Boom, midtones, way down. Happy with it. Let's save it. So save in this case is going to prompt us to make saving as, making a copy, or exporting, which is going to be a little bit different because in this case, if we've developed our image, we've developed our raw image. If I just click done after developing our raw image, it's going to create that XMP profile that we've talked about earlier, and we're going to reference it. We're going to reference that, that XMP profile whenever we open up the image. However, save is a little bit different in that if I go to save as, this will prompt me, especially if I'm editing a raw file, because again, you can't save another raw file after making changes to it. You have to compress it, have to. So we're going to save it as a JPEG or a TIFF or a PNG or something like that. But this is kind of interesting in that I guess whatever changes we made to that image are just going to be then saved to this new PNG or JPEG or TIFF or whatever we've created instead of creating that sidecar file for our original image. So what was the other option? Save as a copy. Okay, so if we were to save as a copy, it's going to create another raw file that's identical to our original raw file with an XMP profile. So it's slightly different than just hitting done and going, yep, let's save. And then that XMP profile is created. So I guess the difference in this case is really just comes down to whether or not you want to create a saved as, create a secondary file, which you can do within the done panel as well, but it's just, you can do so as you're going about editing with the save function. So they do similar things. There's not a super difference between the two, but it just kind of gives you it right off the bat, more forefront, versus just going straight to XMP. Can you please go over that balloon trick again, slower? Okay, so what that question really is can you talk about masking further? And I absolutely can. This is a really common question within ACDSee because a lot of people don't realize that it's actually a layered editor. So I'm going to go back into our balloon image that we saved as an ACDSee file so we can edit it again in the future. Man, it's almost as if I planned this. Thanks, David. Okay, so what did we do? To add another file to an image, you can do so with a variety of different methods. The first method is to drag and drop an image from the film strip onto our layer panel. So I'm just going to do that right now. Oh yeah, we don't have any great images for this, but okay, we'll just slide in our subject here onto layer, over top of layer 2. So once I've added an image to our layer panel, I'm placing it at the top of my layer panel here. It's going to prompt me to commit this file. To commit a file, it's going to give me this bounding box. A bounding box is basically giving us the ability to increase or decrease the size within its ratio. Currently, the aspect ratio is locked. What that means is, like, if I increase the size, it's going to increase the size of the image based on sort of the same height and width, no matter how big I make it. So it's sort of maintaining the structure of the image. Versus if I unlock aspect ratio, I can get all googly woogly with it and make it all, definitely the professional technical term, but I can make it sort of wider than the image actually originally was. Or I can make it, so I can sort of, in this case, this is what I'd be referring as functionally distorting an image. Anyway, so when you lock an aspect ratio, that's what you're doing. You're sort of working within the original, dimensions of the image. But anyway, so you've got all the abilities here to turn images, and you can do all this fun stuff within this section, and you can size down and all these things. But anyway, at some point, you're going to functionally be happy with it, and you're going to commit your image using the top left-hand corner here. So now you've added this secondary layer to your image. So layers, and this is going to be the short version because I've talked about this for literally hours in other workshops. Layers are ordered in such a way that you see them, they take priority based on where they're located in the layer tree. At the bottom, the roots are layer 1, and at the very top of our tree is this layer 3. If I place this lower on in the layer order, it's going to appear very different, right? So at the very top is it's taking the most visual precedence as it appears over all the other layers. So you'll notice interactions as you move layers, between their categories, between the different layers. And you move one simply by clicking it, just dragging it to the desired location on the layer tree. You'll notice that when I move my layer 3 underneath my layer 2, something weird happens. And what that is that I'm seeing my layer 2, which now takes precedence over my layer 1 at the top, but not at the bottom. I've got only half of my woman beneath of it. Why is that? Well, the reason why that is because layer 2 is masked. A mask is basically an on and off switch, a selectable on and off switch for an image. When a mask is white, I'm going to set this mask to white. The mask is displaying everything as on, essentially. This image is on. And because it's at the top of my layer order, it's on, and then visually the only thing I can see. If I set a layer mask to black, it's off, and I can't see it at all. But what's interesting about masks is it allows us to sort of paint on to sort of adjust where we see those masks. So, or where we see that image rather. So if I have my layer 2 selected and I want to be very careful as to select the mask itself, which is the box that appears to the right of the image, not the image itself, but this mask box. And I was to paint on, remembering that white is on in foreground color here, and black is off. If I'm to paint this on, well, then we're going to see that top image, right? So I'm sort of painting it on specific areas. How do I mask an image? I'm just going to hide this image using the I button to the left of it. And I'm going to click on layer 3 that appears beneath it. To mask an image, you go down to the very bottom of this adjustment layers panel and you just say add layer mask. It's going to add this layer mask. The layer mask is by default 100% on, and then you can go about sort of masking away this image by adding black in this case, which is the opposite of white. We're turning it off to sections of our image. Again, we're not making art here. We're just really illustrating the fundamentals of it. So when you say, can you please go over that balloon trick again? What I mean is, when you add an image, when you add masks, you have further control over the way that those images look. By order, by masking, and obviously by saving your image as an ACDSee file so that you can adjust it. You can edit it in the future. So David, I would direct you to the video on our workshop. There's also a ton of videos on YouTube that discuss layer order, why it matters, how to make compositional images. Those are on our YouTube, but specifically the edit mode workshop video, hit that up, try it out, because you can learn a lot about masking in that video. And it truly, when I say that it's too large to tackle for just a Q&A, it really is. So I would direct you there. But that is the super dumbed down, rough, quick and dirty version of masking and how do I get that balloon trick again? Okay, Carl asks, I've used histograms in another industry, but when I look at them, I'm confused about what they represent. Is the histogram a power level, row by row in a file? Let's open the histogram. I'm going to get out of this image here. So histograms you can get in manage mode actually. You can also get them in obviously develop mode or edit mode. I'm just going to go into develop mode. Edward asked just really quickly, do you use this for putting names on a picture? It depends on whether or not you mean watermark or text, but both of those things you can do within edit mode using the text or watermark tool. But back to Carl's question. I've used histograms in another industry, but when I look at them, yeah, I'm confused. Okay, so here's the histogram. So histograms are a representation of color in an image. So in this case, what we have at the very left is this bar of black and white. This represents light. And then within the actual gram itself, it indicates the percentages of colors that appear within that spectrum. So at the very bottom, on the very, very far left, it means blacks. So how many blues, greens, and reds appear within our sort of shadowy blacky area here? Well, if we look at our histogram, it's indicating that actually quite a lot of the blacks, greens, and reds appear within that sort of luminosity, okay? As we move further and further forward into the light spectrum, so now we're not talking about bright whites, but we're talking about things that are like slightly lighter than midtones. These are what I would call like highlights, I guess. But in the highlight spectrum, you can see, which I think is representational of our image, look at how much red you see. Well, there's a ton of red here because all these buildings are red, but also her hair is kind of auburny and red, and her skin is also sort of red. So as we're looking at the areas that are brighter, not darker, you'll notice that, boom, you got a massive spike in the amount of reds that appear within this section, okay? Which is different from something like all of these darks. Well, what's the darkest portion of our image? The darkest portion of our image is actually her very dark blue shirt as well as maybe some of these areas of her hair in here, maybe this black door that's behind her. Well, all of those are sort of within the blue spectrum, which you can see is sort of maxed out in the shadows to slightly lower than midtones section. So this is not a representation of left to right. No, it is not it's not a visual representation of our image on a strictly geometrical basis. That is not what it is. What it is, hey, we have blacks here, shadows, midtones, highlights, and whites. What percentage of colors appear at these sort of variables? That is how a histogram works in ACDSee. Terrence asked, does this version run on OS Mojave? I don't know what that is. Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes, so that's Mac. Yes, you are limited to Photo Studio 5 for Mac. So ACDSee was historically always a PC product, and just last year we've started to go about the process of catching up for Mac products. We've been working on our Mac product and trying to bring it up to the level of our PC product. That's an ongoing process, but for the current purpose of, if you are a Mac user, we have a Mac product specifically for that. Our PC product will not work on your Mac. Ken asked, can I import an exported keyword file from Lightroom? Can I import an exported keyword file from Lightroom? I don't know the answer to that. Please send me an email and I'll find out for you. Add stitching. Oh, photo stitching. That is something that's been requested a lot. Obviously, it's not in the photo right now, or sorry, in the photo editor right now. If you're looking for the ability to stitch together photos, send me an email. I'll send it to our developers and we'll pressure those guys to try to get it in a new product. Does editing in develop mode increase the size of a file? So when you edit a JPEG, you're going to be making some changes to that JPEG in develop mode, and this will increase the file size. With a RAW file, because the side, when you go to edit a RAW file, you're not actually editing the RAW file per se, you're creating a sidecar file that ACDSee references. You will not increase the size of your RAW file, but you will have created a really small, like, I don't know, 32 kilobyte file for that the program will reference. Overall, RAW files are quite large, like they're huge. They can be they can be upwards of a gigabyte, honestly, in file size, depending on your image. So, but when you edit a JPEG, JPEGs are often going to be quite a bit smaller in file size, just because they're a compressed image. JPEGs are destructive. But so when you go to make edits to them, those changes that you've made are going to be saved to the JPEG and therefore slightly increasing the file size. Is it small? Yes. Does the file size increase? Yes. Can you apply the same edits to multiple photos from edit mode? Great question. Such a good question. Okay, so yes, there's two ways to do that within ACDSee. One is to use batching, which we're not going to be talking about because I prefer using actions. We will be talking about actions. So let's go into an image in edit mode. I'm going to go into any old photo. Okay, let's go into the coastline photo. I'm going to go into edit mode, and I'm going to begin the process of recording an action. Okay, so I have my photo. I'm in edit mode. Actions is just right up at the top here. Okay, this is the action section. You have the actions browser. This is how you would preview an action and also play it on your image. But we don't want to do this. We want to create an action. So I'm going to start recording an action by clicking the record button here. Okay, boom, pops up the action menu. This is going to be our tracking of how we've changed this image. Okay, so what do we want to do to this image? Well, it's a bit too greeny. Like, we need to adjust the white balance. The white balance is way too far leaning on, it's too tinted towards the green yellow. So I'm going to slide the white balance more to the blue section, and I'm going to slightly slide it more to the reds as well. And I'm actually going to further emphasize the blues. So I'm just going to keep sliding this until I'm comfortable. I think right there that's where we're at. Because if we're looking at this image at the very beginning, it's very hot. Like that is a very, very hot image. The sky is bright, bright yellow. Versus that's probably more what that image looked like when we actually saw it, you know? That's probably closer to what it looked like. So we've added a white balance adjustment. You'll notice that, hey, look, it's recorded that. It's added a white balance. It's also adjusted the white balance. Well, maybe we wanted to add one more thing. Maybe we want to add a vignette to our image. I'm just going to adjust the vignette slightly, the values, just so it's ever so subtle. And then it's also added the vignette and the adjustment of the vignette. If our action simply stopped there, we could continue going with a variety of different adjustments and changes to this image. But if it was just to start there at a preliminary, what we could do is we could then save the action. So I'm like, hey, I'm happy with this. I've corrected the color in this image. This was way too hot. And I've also added a nice visual vignette so that I can focus more on the center of this image and less on sort of, it brings the focal range into more of the center of the image, which, I mean, really, let's be honest, this is what's cool about this image, not necessarily the sort of hilly field here. Okay, cool. Let's now save this action. So I'm going to stop recording. So when you stop a recording, it's going to prompt you to be like, hey, what is this thing called? What did you do to this image? And it's going to ask you to find a home for it in a category. Okay, so I'm going to name this action warmth adjustment. And then I'm going to find a home for it. Let's just put it under favorites, I guess. I can just even create a new category. Let's just create a new category just called, I don't know, warmth. And maybe let's just change this to warmth blue. That way it gives it a little bit more of a feel for what this is. So I'm going to put my action name warmth blue into my warmth category and save. It's going to save that adjustment. And now we don't even need to save this image because this action is now saved. So if I cancel, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to go back into manage mode. And if I want to play this action on my image, I can simply go to my actions browser, which is in the top left-hand corner, similar to where it is in edit mode, and just run warmth blue on this image. It's going to play it. It's actually created as a subsequent file. It's not overwriting our original image. It's actually just creating a new image, and then boom, there's our coastline _0 with the warmth blue adjustment saved to it. This is kind of cool too because we can actually run a bunch of these changes on multiple images as well. So if you had if you went out and did a wedding shoot and all of them had that same warmth problem in that it was slightly brighter out that day than you were anticipating and you wanted to correct to I, well, I would just go to the actions panel and once again select warmth blue and play warmth blue on every single image that I had selected within manage mode. Okay, so this is how you can apply the same edits to multiple photos in edit mode. It's fast, it's really fast, and you've saved that adjustment, so you can use it in the future. If you know that you just want to slightly, tweak contrast, and you want to slightly tweak a little bit of warmth or warming or something like that, or you like blues at a certain vibrance, well then, hell, you can put that on as many images as you want as long as that action is saved. Okay, so that's how that works. Okay, Owen asks, can you print your raw file after develop? And will this include the side file? Okay, this is a complicated question. So no, you can't print out a raw file. Well, you might be able to using certain programs or whatever, but within ACDSee, you're not printing a raw file. You're going to be printing a compression of a raw file. And again, let's further state, no program, right? No program, no Adobe, no Light, no Capture One, none of these programs, no Affinity, none of these programs can edit raw files. Okay. That's why when I was talking earlier about creating this XMP profile, this sidecar file, That is what we reference when we edit something. So when we're editing a raw file, what I really mean is we're editing an XMP profile that references a raw file. So can you print a raw file after develop? We'll include the sidecar file. What you'd be doing is you'd be printing out a compression that is the amalgamation of your sidecar file with the compressed version of, in this case, probably a JPEG of your raw file. But the question, ultimately, all you want to know is, will I be able to see the adjustments that I've made to my image when I go to print it off? Absolutely, yeah, 100%. It will be able to replicate those XMP. Those profiles that you've created, those adjustments, the blues, the contrast changes, all these things when you go to print it. It's just not really printing a raw file. It's sort of printing a JPEG file that has some changes done to it, if that makes any sense. Okay. Oh, so many questions still, and I've only answered 21. Wow, this is amazing. Again, you know what, guys, I'm going to say this right now. Like, I'm going to try to do my best to answer as many more questions here, but we've already been doing this workshop for about an hour. Oh, more than an hour and a half. So, and I do mean this, I would love to answer more of these questions via email, but I think I'm just going to write all these questions down. Like, I'm going to write them all down, and I want to do another workshop like this. Like, I'm just baffled with the amount of interest in this is. And I guess the common questions one has really been useful for me. I'm just sort of stunned by this. Anyway, so long story short is I will answer as many questions via my email, aprice@acdsystems.com, to all attendees. There you go. As I can. But 100% we'll be doing another one of these workshops. In fact, actually, that will be the next workshop, just so I can answer more of these. And I'm going to write down as many of these Q&A questions from this panel right here as I can, so that we can start to address them in the next videos. There's going to be some Q&A questions that I won't know the answer to, or ones that are probably just also simple, that might not require their own video. But anyway, I guess what I'm saying is we've already been this for an hour and a half, and I've barely answered your questions, and I really want to. So thank you so much for participating. There's so many more I want to get to, but I just can't with the time that I have. So yeah, so unfortunately, like I said, please email me if you have an urgent question you'd like to have answered. I'm going to write all these down. I want to answer these. These are awesome questions. I'm doing this workshop again, 100%. So stay tuned to this. And if I think I'll also aim to do a YouTube series as well with these questions. So if people have specific questions about the product, I'm going to try to answer them with maybe some more YouTube content. So to answer Rudolph's question, and his question is, hey, I've missed almost all of this. Is there a copy I can watch? Yes, there will be. I will put this workshop on YouTube so that you can watch it in the future. It generally takes about 2 days for me to do that. So expect it in about 2 days, but 100% it will be on our YouTube channel. If you have more general questions about ACDSee in general, we have about 4 workshops already on our YouTube channel. Let me just show you where that is too, so y'all can see it. And I'll give a link to it as well as my email here. I just don't want to leave people hanging. I'm so baffled with how many amazing questions there is. So our ACDSee YouTube channel, we can actually just, I think, look it up. It's the first one that comes up. Yeah, awesome. So the channel address is here. Like I said earlier in the video, we have ACDSee for Beginners, which is a series with Alec Watson, professional photographer. You can watch our past workshops on manage mode, develop mode, and edit mode, as well as our filters and actions workshop just within that section. These are full, like 1.5 hour long sessions, and then also just general tutorials as you see fit. So that link is here. Anyway, friends, it's been crazy. Like, I can't believe the amount of attention and interest in this. So please forgive me for not answering all of your questions. I answered 21 questions today, and there's another 60 to answer. So my sincere apologies. That being said, I am off for tonight. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I really appreciate you guys hanging out for this workshop. I love doing them. I love the community, and just the amount of interest in it is incredible. So thank you all. I'll be signing off in a second. I just need to copy and paste all these questions. So let's see if I can even do that within. Oh, awesome. Okay. I'm just going to stick around and copy and paste some quick questions here. But I'm going to be muting my mic now, guys. Thank you so much.